The year was 2347, and humanity had spread across 3 star systems, building colonies on distant worlds and mining asteroids for precious metals. But despite all their progress, they remained a minor species in a galaxy filled with ancient civilizations. The Concord was an alliance of 12 elder races who had ruled the stars for millions of years. And they looked at humans the way adults look at children playing with dangerous toys, finding them clever and resourceful but ultimately unimportant in the grand scheme of galactic politics. Humans had joined the Concord 60 years ago, and in exchange for access to faster-than-light travel and trading rights, they had agreed to certain conditions. And the most painful condition was the decommissioning of their warships. The elder races had studied human history and found it disturbing, seeing a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing itself, developing weapons of terrible power and tactics of brutal efficiency. So they demanded that humanity disarm its most powerful vessels, the Leviathan class. Dreadnoughts were sealed away in orbital yards above Earth, their weapon systems locked under galactic treaty, their crews scattered to civilian jobs and quiet retirements. And the Concord assured humanity that they would never need such vessels again because the galaxy was at peace. But peace is a fragile thing. The distress signal erupted from New Carthage at 3 in the morning, Earth Standard Time, and it was not a simple call for help, but a scream of absolute terror that echoed across light years. New Carthage was a young colony of 2 million souls, located in a system far from the main trade routes, and the colonists had built a good life there with farms and factories and schools where children learned about both Earth history and alien cultures. The signal showed images that made seasoned military officers turn pale, revealing ships that looked like living things with hulls of black chitin and weapons that glowed with sick green light. And these ships numbered in the thousands. The Vethkai had come. Every species in the galaxy knew the Vethkai, a swarm mind of living ships that consumed everything in their path. And they had destroyed 17 civilizations across 100,000 years, leaving nothing behind but dead worlds and silence. The Concord had fought them twice and lost both times, learning only that the swarm adapted to every tactic and overcame every defense. So the elder races had adopted a simple strategy of avoidance, staying away from Vethkai territory and hoping the swarm would not come looking for them. Now the swarm had found New Carthage Admiral Chen Weilin received the distress signal in her small apartment in Singapore, where she had spent the last 5 years writing military history books and trying to forget the warships she had once commanded. She was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much. And when she watched the footage from New Carthage, those eyes filled with cold fury within the hour. She was in contact with the Concord High Council, requesting immediate military intervention. To save the colony, the response came quickly, and it was exactly what she had feared. The Concord expressed sympathy for the human colonists, but explained that intervention was not possible because the mathematics of war did not favor such action. As the Vethkai numbered over 3,000 ship forms and any fleet sent against them would be destroyed, better to accept the loss and prevent further casualties, the elder races said. And they reminded Admiral Chun that humans had agreed to follow Concord guidance in military matters. Chun listened to their words and felt something old and dangerous wake up inside her, something that had been sleeping since the decommissioning ceremonies all those years ago. She thanked the Concord for their wisdom and ended the communication. Then she made a different call. The orbital yards above the Pacific Ocean had been quiet for decades, maintained by a skeleton crew who kept the sealed warships from falling apart, but never expected them to fly again. When Admiral Chun's authorization codes came through, The yard commander thought it was a mistake and requested confirmation 3 times before finally accepting that the orders were real. The Leviathan-class dreadnoughts were waking up. There were 7 of them, each one a mountain of metal and fury, each one designed by a species that had learned warfare through thousands of years of bitter experience, and each one named for a battle that humanity would never forget. The ISV Thermopylae carried the name of an ancient stand where 300 warriors held back an army, and its crew had always known that their ship was meant for sacrifice. The ISV Stalingrad bore the name of a city that had bled for months, where soldiers fought in frozen ruins and never surrendered, and its engines hummed with that same stubborn defiance. The ISV Verdun remembered a battle where men had said they shall not pass and meant it, holding the line at any cost. And its armor was thick enough to make that promise again. The ISV Gallipoli carried the weight of a campaign that had failed, but taught lessons written in blood. And its crew understood that even defeat could have meaning. The ISV Gettysburg honored a field where a nation had torn itself apart and then found a way forward. And its weapon systems were designed to end wars decisively. The ISV Waterloo marked the end of an emperor's dreams, and its tactical computers held the collected wisdom of 1,000 commanders. And then there was the flagship. The ISV Remember was the largest and most powerful of them all, and its name was not taken from any single battle, but from the promise that humanity made to itself after every war. The promise to never forget the cost of violence or the necessity of being ready to pay it again. Admiral Chun arrived at the orbital yards to find chaos and purpose mixed together, as engineers worked frantically to reactivate weapon systems that had been sealed for decades. And old soldiers answered recall orders they had never expected to receive. The Concorde sent a formal protest within 6 hours, demanding that humanity stand down and accept the loss of New Carthage as the price of galactic stability. Admiral Chun read the protest and composed a response that was only 3 words long. We remember everything. The message spread through the fleet like fire, and every crew member understood what it meant, because humans had always been good at remembering, carrying their history forward through stories and songs and the names of their warships. The Vethkai had never faced a species like this. They had consumed races that surrendered when the odds turned against them, and they had devoured civilizations that fought with logic and restraint. But they had never encountered a species that named its deadliest weapons after its own tragedies. The 7 ships began their burn toward New Carthage, leaving Earth behind in a blaze of engine fire. And the elder races of the Concorde watched in confusion and horror. A Concorde observer sent a final message asking Admiral Chun if she understood that her fleet was almost certainly flying to its death. Chun smiled and replied that humans had been flying toward death since they first left their caves to hunt animals 10 times their size, and they had never let the odds stop them before. The stars stretched into lines as the fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed. New Carthage was 8 days away. The Vethkai were waiting, and the deadliest warships on Earth were coming to answer the call. The journey to New Carthage took 8 days, and during that time Admiral Chun watched her fleet transform from a collection of museum pieces into something that made her proud and afraid. At the same time, the crews had come from everywhere. Captain Marcus Webb of the Thermopylae had been teaching history at a university in London when the recall order found him, and he left his lectures half-finished and caught the first shuttle to orbit without saying goodbye to anyone, because he knew they would not understand. Commander Yusuf Okonkwo had been working as a security consultant for a mining company, spending his days reviewing safety protocols and trying to forget the tactical brilliance that had once made him famous. And when he took his station on the Remember, his hands remembered the controls like old friends, Lieutenant. Sarah Johansson had been raising 2 children on a quiet colony world, telling them bedtime stories about the stars. And she kissed them goodbye and promised to come back, even though she knew she might be lying. They were all like this. Men and women who had been forced to put away their skills and their purpose, now suddenly called back to what they were always meant to do. The Concord had never understood why humans insisted on crewing their warships with living beings, when automated systems could fight more efficiently. But the answer was simple: machines did not. Remember, machines did not carry the weight of history in their hearts. Machines did not fight harder when they thought of the people waiting for them at home. The sealed weapon systems came back online one by one, and each activation was a small act of defiance against the galactic order that had demanded humanity put away its teeth. The kinetic accelerators were the simplest weapons. Giant railguns that threw chunks of metal at incredible speeds, turning raw mass into destruction. And the Concord had called them primitive, but effective. The nuclear-pumped lasers were more sophisticated, using small atomic explosions to generate beams of light hot enough to cut through any armor. And the elder races had found these weapons disturbingly efficient, but the Hellfire torpedoes, what would truly frighten the Concord, these were weapons designed by a species that had invented the concept of mutually assured destruction. Missiles that carried payloads of compressed antimatter and guidance systems smart enough to chase their targets through any evasion pattern. And the Concord had insisted these weapons be destroyed rather than simply sealed. Admiral Chun had agreed to destroy them. She had lied. The secret compartments opened, and the Hellfire torpedoes emerged from hiding, loaded into launch tubes by crews who handled them with a mixture of reverence and terror. Because these weapons were humanity's final argument, Commander Okonkwo spent the journey studying the Vethkai, reading every report and watching every recording of their previous attacks, looking for weaknesses that other species had missed. What he found both encouraged and worried him. The Vethkai were a swarm mind. Thousands of individual ship forms connected by a shared consciousness that allowed them to coordinate perfectly. And this was their greatest strength because they could react as one to any threat, but it was also a potential weakness. Other species had tried to disrupt the swarm mind with electronic warfare, jamming the signals that connected the ship forms. And this had never worked because the Vethkai communication was biological rather than technological. Other species had tried to destroy the swarm mind by targeting what they believed to be command ships. But the consciousness was distributed across every ship form and could not be killed by destroying any single vessel. Other species had tried to negotiate, offering resources and territory in exchange for peace. But the Vethkai did not understand negotiation because they were not a civilization, but a hunger-given form. Commander Okonkwo looked at all these failed strategies and asked a different question. What if you did not try to outthink the swarm mind? What if you simply hurt it so badly that it learned to fear you? Vethkai had consumed species that fought logically, always seeking to minimize their own casualties while maximizing enemy losses. And this was how every civilized race wore. But humans were not entirely civilized. Human military history was filled with moments of deliberate sacrifice, times when soldiers had traded their lives for victory, not because they had to, but because they chose to. And this concept was alien to the swarm men. The Vethkai could not understand why any creature would choose death when survival was possible. Admiral Chun called a meeting of all ship captains on the 6th day of the journey, their faces appearing on screens in the Remember's war room. And she explained what she wanted them to do. The strategy was called the Anvil, and it was something the Concord had specifically forbidden humanity from ever using again. The ships would cluster together in a tight, formation, presenting what appeared to be an easy target, inviting the swarm to attack with overwhelming force, and then the trap would spring. Each captain listened and understood what Chun was asking, knowing that some of them would not survive, knowing that their ships would become weapons themselves if necessary. And not one of them objected. Captain Webb of the Thermopylae spoke for all of them when he said that his ship was named for a sacrifice, and he had always known what that meant. The fleet dropped out of faster than light speed on the 8th day, and New Carthage hung before them like a wounded jewel, its surface scarred by fires that could be seen from orbit. The colony was dying but not dead. Sensors detected nearly 500,000 life signs in underground bunkers, survivors hiding from the horror above, waiting for help that the Concorde had said would never come. And surrounding the planet like a cloud of black locusts were the Vethke 3,000 ship forms turned their attention to the 7 human vessels. And the swarm mind considered this new development with cold alien intelligence. 7 against 3,000. The mathematics were simple. The swarm began to move, flowing toward the human fleet like a wave of darkness. And Admiral Chun watched them come with a smile that held no joy. She opened a channel to all ships and spoke words that would echo across the galaxy today. "We teach the universe what humanity means," she said. "And today we remind ourselves why we remember." The crew of the Remember responded with a sound that was half cheer and half war cry. And similar sounds erupted from every ship in the fleet. The Thermopylae moved to the front of the formation, its captain calm and ready. The Stalingrad anchored the left flank, its crew already running final checks on weapons that had been waiting decades for this moment. The Verdun held the right side, steady as the fortress it was named for. Gallipoli and Gettysburg took positions behind, ready to plug any gap that opened. The Waterloo served as reserve, its tactical computers calculating thousands of possible scenarios, and the Remember sat at the center. Admiral Chun watching the swarm approach, counting the seconds until the universe would learn what human warships could do. The Vethkai had destroyed 17 civilizations. They had never faced humanity at war. They were about to learn why that mattered. The first wave of Vethkai ship forms hit the human formation like a hammer striking an anvil, and the space around New Carthage erupted into fire and light. 300 swarm vessels came screaming in from multiple angles, their weapons painting the void with beams of sickly green energy. And they expected the human ships to scatter the way every other prey species had scattered before them. The human ships did not scatter. The anvil formation held steady, each vessel covering its neighbors, interlocking fields of fire, creating a wall of destruction that the swarm mind had never encountered before. Kinetic accelerators roared in silence, throwing slugs of dense metal that punched through Vethkai hull flesh and emerged from the other side. And nuclear-pumped lasers carved burning lines across the black chitin of the living ships. The first wave lost 40 vessels in 90 seconds. The swarm mind paused to consider this development, analyzing the human tactics and searching for weaknesses. And while it thought, the second wave launched. This time, 600 ship forms attacked, coming from below where the anvil formation seemed weakest. And this time, the swarm adapted its approach, spreading out to avoid the concentrated fire. But Commander Okonkwo had predicted this. The Thermopylae broke formation and dove to meet the second wave alone, its engines burning at maximum power. And Captain Webb ordered all weapons to fire continuously, even as enemy beams began scoring his hull. The swarm mind saw an isolated target and redirected forces to overwhelm it, exactly as Okonkwo had planned, because the Thermopylae was not trying to survive this engagement. Deep in the ship's core, engineers had spent the entire journey modifying the forward reactor, turning it into something that was no longer meant to provide power, but to release it all at once. Captain Webb watched the swarm vessels closing in from every direction, surrounding his ship in a sphere of death. and he gave the evacuation order with 3 minutes to spare. Escape pods launched from the Thermopylae like seeds from a dying flower, carrying the crew away from what was about to happen. And the swarm mind noted this with confusion, because prey did not usually abandon functional vessels. Webb remained on the bridge with a skeleton crew of volunteers, keeping the ship steady, making sure the swarm stayed focused on the Thermopylae rather than the escape pods. He opened a final communication to Admiral Chun. "Tell them we held the pass," he said, and then he gave the order. The forward reactor overloaded. The explosion was not like a bomb, but like a sun being born. A sphere of nuclear fire that expanded at enormous speed. And the Vethkai ships that had gathered to finish off the Thermopylae were caught in its radius. 237 swarm vessels died in that single moment, converted from living ships to expanding clouds of debris and vapor. And the swarm mind recoiled in something that might have been surprise. The escape pods from the Thermopylae reached the Stalingrad safely, and Captain Webb was not among them. But his sacrifice had changed the mathematics of the battle. The remaining human ships did not celebrate. They pressed the attack. Admiral Chun ordered the formation to advance into the gap that the Thermopylae had created. And the swarm mind found itself on the defensive for the first time in 10,000 years. The Vethkai had always been the hunters, the devourers, the unstoppable wave that consumed everything in its path. But now they were being pushed back by 7 ships that had become 6. No, not pushed back. Hurt. The swarm mind felt the deaths of those 200 ships like wounds in its own flesh. Felt the connection severing. Felt the loss in a way that no previous enemy had ever made it feel. And it did not like this feeling. The third wave was larger. 800 vessels, and the swarm adapted again, keeping distance from the human ships and using long-range weapons to wear down their shields. But humans had invented siege warfare. Long before they reached the stars, the Verdun anchored itself and became a fortress, its shields absorbing punishment that would have destroyed any Concorde vessel, its crew working to repair damage even as new damage accumulated. And its weapons never stopped firing. "They shall not pass," the crew shouted over internal communications, repeating words that soldiers had spoken centuries ago on a planet far away. And somehow those words gave them strength. The Stalingrad flanked left with engines screaming, drawing swarm vessels away from the main formation. And its captain fought with the cold patience of a winter that had killed armies. The Gettysburg and Gallipoli worked together, covering each other's blind spots. Their fire coordinated by tactical computers that had learned from every battle humanity had ever fought, and the Remember sat at the center of it all. Admiral Chun directing the battle like a conductor directing an orchestra of destruction. The swarm mind tried something new. It gathered a massive force of over 1,000 ship forms and sent them in a single overwhelming rush, determined to crush the human fleet through sheer numbers, accepting that it would take losses but confident that mathematical superiority would triumph. This was when the Hellfire torpedoes launched. 60 missiles streaked from the Remember and Waterloo, their antimatter warhead small but impossibly destructive. And the swarm had never seen weapons like this. The torpedoes did not travel in straight lines, but hunted their targets with malevolent intelligence, changing course to follow evasive maneuvers, slipping through point defense fire, finding their prey with patience that bordered on cruelty. When they detonated, they did not explode so much as erase, converting matter directly into energy in blasts. That made the Thermopylae sacrifice look small. 400 more swarm vessels ceased to exist. The swarm mind felt something it had never felt before, not just pain, fear. This was impossible because the swarm mind was a collective consciousness that had existed for millions of years and had consumed races that the humans had never heard of. But here in the burning dark above New Carthage, facing ships named for ancient slaughters. It began to understand that it had finally encountered something different. These humans did not fight like prey. They did not seek to minimize losses or preserve themselves at any cost. They fought like something that had been fighting forever, something that had learned to turn its own destruction into a weapon, something that treated death as a tool rather than an ending. The battle had been raging for 6 hours, and the swarm had lost nearly 1,000 vessels while destroying only one human ship. The mathematics that had always favored the Vethkai were failing. Admiral Chung watched the swarm's movements on her tactical display and saw the hesitation, saw the confusion, saw the cracks forming in an enemy that had never known doubt. She ordered all ships to advance. The anvil became a spear, and the spear drove forward into the heart of the swarm. The battle for New Carthage had entered its 19th hour, and the void around the planet was filled with debris and fire, and the scattered remains of nearly 2,000 Vethkai ship forms. Human fleet had paid its own price. The Thermopylae was gone, sacrificed in that brilliant nuclear burst that had shattered the swarm's confidence. The Gallipoli was dying. Captain Helena Vasquez had held her ship in a narrow corridor of space for 4 hours, blocking a Vethkai flanking maneuver that would have surrounded the remaining human vessels. And her hull was torn open in a dozen places, her crew fighting in vacuum suits because the atmosphere had long since vented into space. She received orders from Admiral Chun to withdraw and refused them. The swarm had identified her ship as the weak point and was concentrating forces to break through, and if she moved, they would pour through the gap like water through a broken dam. Vasquez knew her history and knew that the Gallipoli campaign of ancient Earth had been a failure, a landing that never achieved its objectives, a tragedy of miscommunication and missed opportunities. But she also knew that the soldiers who fought there had not been failures. They had done everything asked of them, and more. She intended to do the same. A massive Vethkai carrier form emerged from the swarm, a vessel 10 times the size of the Gallipoli, its hull bristling with weapons and smaller ship forms that clung to it like parasites. And it moved directly toward her wounded ship. Captain Vasquez made her decision in an instant. She ordered all remaining crew to the Folijun, in an instant, escape pods, and sealed herself in the bridge with 5 volunteers who understood what she was planning. The Gallipoli's engines were damaged but not destroyed, and she pushed them beyond their limits, beyond what the designers had ever intended. Feeling the ship shake and groan around her as it accelerated toward the carrier form, Swarm Mind recognized the danger too late. The Gallipoli struck the carrier form at tremendous speed, the smaller human ship driving deep into the alien flesh of the living vessel. And then Captain Vasquez detonated every weapon in her ship's arsenal simultaneously. Explosion consumed both vessels entirely, along with the hundreds of smaller ship forms that had been attached to the carrier. And when the light faded, there was nothing left but expanding gas and the echoes of a poem that Vasquez had been reciting over the communication channel in her final moments. She had chosen words from a Turkish soldier who had fought at the original Gallipoli, words about finding honor in death and peace in sacrifice. And the words had reached every ship in the human fleet. The crews did not mourn. They did not have time to mourn, but they remembered. The Gettysburg was the next to fall, holding a defensive position near New Carthage's orbital stations, protecting evacuation shuttles that were carrying survivors from the planets. Surface Commander David Lincoln had brought his ship into the battle knowing he was unlikely to survive, accepting this as the price of duty. And he had spent the entire fight protecting others while taking damage that would have destroyed lesser vessels. His shields failed in the 17th hour. His armor began to crack in the 18th and the 19th hour. with his weapons nearly exhausted and his crew reduced by half. He received word that the last evacuation shuttle had reached safety. He could have withdrawn then. He chose not to. The Gettysburg made a final stand, drawing Vethkai attention away from the civilian vessels, fighting with weapons that were failing and engines that were dying. And Commander Lincoln broadcast a message to the swarm that no translator could properly convert, but that every human understood. You want to know what we are? He said, we are the ones who do not stop. We are the ones who fight when fighting makes no sense. We are the ones who turned a civil war into a rebirth and carved words about freedom into the stone of a battlefield. The Gettysburg died with all hands, taking 83 Vethkai ship forms with it, and its loss was felt across the fleet like the loss of a family member. 4 ships remained. The Stalingrad, its hull scored by 100 hits. Its crew exhausted but unbroken. The Verdun, steady as a fortress. Its shield somehow still holding the Waterloo, moving with precision that bordered on mechanical. Its tactical computers calculating paths through the chaos. And the Remember, battered but alive, Admiral Chun still standing on its bridge, her voice hoarse from hours of commands, but her spirit undiminished. The swarm mind looked at what remained of its fleet and made a calculation. It had begun this battle with over 3,000 ship forms. It now had fewer than 1,000. The humans had lost 3 ships out of 7 by any mathematical measure. The swarm was still winning, still had numerical superiority, still should have been able to overwhelm the remaining human vessels. But the swarm mind was no longer thinking about mathematics. It was thinking about pain. It was thinking about the fear that had crept into its ancient consciousness. The terrible realization that these small, soft creatures were willing to burn themselves to ash if it meant taking the swarm with them. It was thinking about the Hellfire torpedoes that the humans had not yet used, wondering how many more of those terrible weapons remained in the ships that still fought for the first time in its existence. The swarm mind considered retreat. The hesitation lasted only moments, but it was enough. Admiral Chun saw the change in the swarm's movement patterns, saw the coordination falter, saw individual ship forms begin to drift apart as the collective consciousness struggled with thoughts it had never had before. She gave the order to attack. 4 remaining human ships surged forward with everything they had left, their crews finding strength they did not know they possessed, their weapons firing in patterns that seemed almost desperate, but were actually precisely calculated. The swarm broke. It did not happen all at once, but in pieces. Individual ship forms turning away from the battle, fleeing toward the edge of the system, abandoning their collective purpose in a way that had never happened in recorded galactic history. The swarm mind tried to reassert control, but found that fear had spread too deeply through its consciousness, had infected too many of its component parts, and for the first time in millions of years, it could not hold itself together. Admiral Chun watched the retreat and felt no satisfaction. She ordered pursuit. The Vethkai had never offered mercy to the civilizations they consumed. They had never accepted surrender or shown compassion, and so the human ships chased the fleeing swarm to the edge of the system, hunting them down one by one, and the weapons that had been designed for defense became instruments of execution. The battle ended in the 23rd hour. The last Vethkai ship form was destroyed trying to escape to open space. And then there was silence. Admiral Chun ordered her fleet to halt and observe 30 seconds of quiet. For the ships and crews they had lost, the Thermopylae and its captain who had held the pass, the Gallipoli and its captain who had made failure into triumph, the Gettysburg and its commander who had stood like a wall between evil and innocence. The silence stretched longer than 30 seconds, because no one wanted to break it. Then Admiral Chun spoke again, and her voice was tired but steady. "We came here to save our people," she said. "Now let us finish that work. The remaining ships turned back toward New Carthage, and the survivors on the planet looked up from their bunkers to see human vessels descending through the sky. Rescue had come after all. The galaxy watched and the galaxy trembled within hours of the battle's end. Recordings began spreading across every communication network, shared by observers and analysts and terrified Concord officials who could not believe what they were seeing. 7 ships against 3,000. 3 ships lost. Over 2,000 enemies destroyed. A swarm mind that had never known fear, learning to run. The elder races of the Concord gathered in emergency session, their holographic representatives filling a chamber that had seen 1,000,000 years of deliberation. And for the first time in living memory, they did not know what to say. The humans had been a minor species, clever but unimportant, allowed into the galactic community as a gesture of goodwill and immediately asked to put away their weapons. Now those weapons had done something impossible. A Concord delegation departed for Earth within 3 days, carrying formal questions that really meant informal fears. And they found humanity changed. The orbital yards above the Pacific were no longer quiet. Shuttles came and went constantly, carrying materials and personnel. And the 4 surviving warships sat in repair cradles while engineers worked to heal their wounds. The Remember had taken the least damage and would fly again within weeks. The Verdun and Stalingrad and Waterloo would take longer, but they would fly again too, and in the yards beside them, new keels were being laid. The Concord delegation was received in the Hall of Remembrance, a vast chamber in the old United Nations building, where the names of every human who had died in every war scrolled endlessly across the walls in letters of soft light. Admiral Chun met them there, her uniform still showing the marks of battle, her face carrying new lines that had not been there a month ago. The lead ambassador was a being called Counselor Vethtan, ancient and wise by the standards of their species, and they looked at the scrolling names with something approaching horror. How many? They asked. Chun considered the question. We stopped counting individual names about 2 centuries ago. She said, the number was too large and growing too fast. So now we count conflicts instead, but even that number is in the thousands. The ambassador's multiple eyes moved across the walls, trying to comprehend the scale of human violence against human. And failing. Why, they asked. Why do you remember this? Why do you build monuments to your own butchery? Admiral Chun walked to a section of wall where particular names scrolled past. My grandmother's brother died in a war one cannot even explain to you, she said. It was about territory and resources and old hatreds that had festered for generations. And he was 17 years old when a weapon built by other humans ended his life. She touched the wall gently where his name appeared. We remember because we have to, she said. We remember because forgetting would be a betrayal of everyone who suffered. We remember because the pain teaches us what we are capable of and reminds us to be better. But you are not better. The ambassador said, your ships still carry weapons of terrible power. Your people still train for war. Your culture still honors those who kill effectively. Chun nodded. We are better than we were, she said, and worse than we hope to become. That is the human condition. We carry our darkness with us always, but we also carry the knowledge of that darkness. And sometimes that knowledge is what allows us to use it when we must. The ambassador asked the question that had brought them across the stars. How did you do it? They said, how did your ships defeat a force that has destroyed civilizations? What tactics did you use that others did not think of? Admiral Chun smiled. And it was not a pleasant expression. We did not outthink them, she said. We did not find some clever weakness in their swarm mind. We simply hurt them until they learned to be afraid. That is not strategy. The ambassador said, that is brutality. Yes. Chun agreed. It is both, and that is why we won. Because we are willing to be brutal when brutality is needed. Because we have 10,000 years of practice at being brutal. Because we have hurt ourselves so badly, so many times, that hurting others holds no terror for us. The ambassador was silent for a long moment. You frightened us. They finally said, when we first encountered your species, we were frightened by your history and your instincts. And that is why we asked you to disarm, I know. Chun said. And now, the ambassador continued. Now we are more frightened, because we see that what we feared was real. That you are exactly as dangerous as we believed. Chun looked at the scrolling names on the walls. You are right to be frightened. She said, we frighten ourselves sometimes. But let me ask you a question in return. The ambassador waited. If the Vethkai had come for one of your worlds, she asked, would you have fought for it? Would you have sent ships to die for people you had never met? Would you have sacrificed yourselves to save strangers? The ambassador did not answer. But the answer was clear in their silence. We did what you would not do. Chun said, we paid a price you were not willing to pay. And we did it not because we are monsters, but because we remember what it means to abandon people to their fate. She gestured to a section of the wall where names from an ancient atrocity scrolled past. We have abandoned people before. She said, we have looked away from suffering because it was not our concern. And every time we did, we wrote those names on our walls to remind ourselves of our failure. The delegation left Earth with more questions than answers, carrying their fear back to the Concord, and the elder races deliberated for weeks about what humanity's victory meant for galactic politics. But while they talked, something else was happening. Minor species across the galaxy had also seen the recordings. They had watched human ships sacrifice themselves without hesitation. They had heard Captain Webb say, tell them we held the pass. They had seen Captain Vasquez recite poetry as she rammed her ship into an enemy 10 times its size, and they had wondered. These small species had been told for millions of years that the elder races of the Concord were their protectors, that they should accept their place in the galactic order, that safety came from cooperation and compliance. Now they knew that was a lie when the Vethkai came. The Concord had offered nothing but sympathy and mathematics when the Vethkai came. The humans had offered blood and fire and victory. Messages began arriving at Earth from dozens of worlds, requesting contact, requesting dialogue, requesting something that sounded almost like Alliance Admiral. Chun read these messages and understood that the battle for New Carthage had changed more than just one colony's fate. The Remember returned to service 3 months after the battle, its hull repaired and its weapons restocked. And Chun stood on its bridge as it departed the orbital yards. New ships would be joining the fleet soon. New names added to the list of vessels that carried human history in their designations. And new crews would learn what it meant to serve on a warship, built by a species that had never stopped fighting. The Concord sent another protest, demanding that humanity stop its military expansion. Admiral Chun sent another response. You asked us once to forget what we are. She wrote, you asked us to pretend that our history did not shape us, that our instincts did not matter, that we could become something soft and safe and acceptable. We tried, she continued. We sealed our ships and scattered our crews and told ourselves that the galaxy was at peace. But peace is a fragile thing. And when it breaks, someone has to fight for it. We are that someone. We are the species that remembers its wars. We are the species that names its ships after its sorrows. We are the species that turns tragedy into strength and sacrifice, into victory, and we will never forget again. The message spread across the galaxy, and the echoes of what humanity had done continued to reverberate through civilizations that had thought they understood the universe. They had been wrong. The universe had humans in it, and that changed everything far from Earth. In the depths of space where the surviving Vethkai had fled, The swarm mind nursed its wounds and felt something it had never felt before its encounter with humanity. It felt old, it felt tired, it felt afraid, and somewhere in its ancient consciousness, a new thought formed, a thought that it could not quite understand but could not ignore. Some prey is not worth hunting. The deadliest warships on Earth had answered the call, and the echoes of their answer would reverberate across the stars forever.